Okay.
We're not live.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the special meeting of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. I'm Rafael Leon, Chairman of the Commission, and let me start with a roll call. Let me clarify the process here for a minute. When I call your name under the roll call, you need to reply here or present, and then please confirm that you can hear me and see me. So I will start with the roll call. Commissioner Wong.
Present.
Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes, I can hear you and see.
Commissioner, let me go down here. Burns.
President, I can hear you and see you.
Commissioner Cox.
Present, I can hear you and see you.
Commissioner Yekovich.
Present, I can hear you and see you.
Commissioner Osman.
I can hear you and see you.
Commissioner Tolliver.
Present, I can hear you and see you.
Thank you. I think that I called everybody.
I wasn't called.
Commissioner Hughes, yeah.
Present, I can hear you and see you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Anybody?
This one now. All right, have a seat. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. If I could ask everybody to put your microphones now on mute, then I'll make some statements and then we'll proceed with the meeting. As many of you may know, the governor has recently signed Public Act 101-0640, making certain amendments to the Open Meeting Act so that we, along with the other boards and commissions, can continue to host virtual meetings during the COVID-19 public health emergency, provided that certain conditions are met. One of those conditions is that I, as head of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, determined that an in-person meeting of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks is not practical or prudent at this time. I want to make sure our virtual meetings meets all the conditions of the Open Meeting Act as amended. Therefore, I'm making a determination pursuant to the newly created Section 7E2 of the Open Meetings Act that an in-person meeting of this Commission on Chicago Landmark is not practical or prudent. Similarly, I'm also making a determination pursuant to the newly created Section 7E5 that because of the disaster as declared by the governor, it is unfeasible for at least one member of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks or its chief administrative officer or its chief legal officer to be physically present at the meeting place, in as much as there is no physical meeting place. Pursuant to a resolution adopted by the Chicago Commission on Chicago Landmarks on June 4th, 2020, regarding the chairman's emergency rule-making powers, I issued emergency rules governing the conduct of remote public commission meetings and provisions for remote public participation effective June 23rd, 2020. This is in response to the COVID-19 emergency. These rules were posted on the Commission's website. In line with these emergency rules, today's special Commission meeting is a virtual meeting being simulcast to the general public via live streaming. This is the third time a Commission meeting has been held virtually. The meeting has been structured to minimize chances for technical difficulties. Members of the general public were encouraged to submit written statements in advance of the meeting. One statement was received from Preservation Chicago, and it has been posted on the Commission's website. Members of the public desiring to speak at today's meetings were required to register before the meeting, but no requests to speak have been received. So we will not go to the first item on today's agenda. And let me note that there is only this one item on this agenda, on this meeting. So let's move on to the item, the Citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund. This is the Citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund 2020 funding priority, and together now fund applications. Commissioners, as a reminder, when you wish to speak, make a motion or second a motion, please press the raise hand function on the panelist window at the right side of your screen, and I will call upon you. If for whatever reason I miss you, please do not hesitate to raise your hand or interrupt me and indicate that you wish to speak. With that in mind, let me call on Diana Cogolo for the presentation. Diana.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Before I present, just 1 second. Before I present the 2020 Adopt a Landmark funding priority and Together Now fund applications, I wanted to provide a brief status update regarding the Citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund. As you know, Adopt a Landmark program funds are generated by the Neighborhood Opportunity Bonus. The Neighborhood Opportunity Bonus, established in 2016, offers increased development rights in downtown zoning districts in exchange for payments to the 3 Neighborhood Opportunity Bonus funds. 80% of the funds are allocated to the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, 10% of the funds go to the Local Impact Fund, and 10% to the Adopt a Landmark Fund. In 2017, the Commission approved a list of funding priorities established by the Department of Planning and Development, and the first funding application round was announced at the June 2017 Commission meeting and posted on the department's website. At that time, approximately $478,000 had been deposited into the Adopt a Landmark Fund. 2 projects were selected from the applications received in 2017. The First Church of Deliverance, located at 4301 South Wabash, and Pullman Art Space Project at 11127 South Langley. In 2017, DPD selected the Uptown Theater, located at 4816 North Broadway, as the recipient of a $3 million Adopt a Landmark Fund grant. 4 projects were selected to receive the Adopt a Landmark grants from the 2019 Citywide application round. These were approved with conditions, and each of the 4 are required to come back to the Commission once the individual project scopes and budgets are fully refined and developed. The grants are also contingent on the development of a final scope of work and proof of financing and sources of funds for the projects within 2 years. To date, the scope of work for 1 project was approved by the Commission, and the remaining 3 projects will be reviewed when ready. In total, $4,468,000 in grants has been approved to date. As you may be aware, on May 5th, Mayor Lightwood announced the launch of the Together Now Fund. In response to the dramatic impacts of the COVID-19 emergency on Chicago's small businesses, combined with the physical damage sustained to the properties housing those businesses during the weekend of May 29th and beyond, the City of Chicago collaborated with philanthropic organizations to create the Together Now Fund. The fund is primarily comprised of multiple city-backed funding sources, including money from the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, Adopt a Landmark, and CARES Act funding, as well as corporate and individual donations. The flexibility in resources will help provide funding for rebuilding or repairing physical storefronts, restocking shelves to account for inventory losses, and ultimately reopening businesses for their neighbors and surrounding communities. Businesses that have experienced damage will be eligible for infrastructure grants of up to $10,000 to repair physical building damage. Businesses that have experienced at least a 25% revenue loss due to COVID-19 will be eligible for grants of up to $4,000 to cover operating costs that arose as a result of economic losses experienced during the pandemic. Each business owner is eligible to apply for 1 infrastructure grant and 1 operational grant. Select regional or national chain businesses, including franchises, branch banks, and payday loan stores are not eligible. And there are some other restrictions that may apply. This map of the city on the slide shows locations of Chicago landmark districts, areas covered by Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, as well as areas of reported damage to buildings at commercial locations. The map does not reflect all areas of damage, but only locations that were reported by June 2nd. As part of the Together Now Fund, the Department of Planning and Development established a funding priority for 2020 Adopt a Landmark Fund grants pursuant to Section 17-4-1006-C-4 of the Chicago zoning ordinance to provide grants, again, not to exceed $10,000 each, to businesses and property owners to assist in the repair, rehabilitation of landmark buildings and contributing buildings in landmark districts that have sustained damage from the events of the weekend of May 29th and beyond. Applications filed to repair or rehabilitate landmark properties will be forwarded to the Historic Preservation Division for review to ensure that the projects are consistent with landmark guidelines. Commission staff will review permit applications, contracts listing the scope of work and costs, photographs of damage, and other information as part of this review. As required by code, funds must be used for substantial interior or exterior renovation work that is visible from a public street or within a portion of the interior that is open to the public. Commission staff will confirm that the work proposed complies with this requirement. In addition, prior to receiving the grant for projects that have not been completed, the property owner will need to enter into an agreement with the city and the commission regarding the manner in which the funds will be used. As at this time, we do not have specific applications to present to you for individual approval of scope and budget. Staff is recommending that the commission approve a set of potential scopes of work that would consist of storefront and or entry door work, including but not limited to glazing replacement, storefront framing repair or replacement, bulkhead repair, entry door repair, window repair or replacement, masonry repairs or cleaning, roof repairs, repair of interior structure, walls, floors, ceilings, or building systems, and repair work of a similar nature required due to the damage sustained. The actual grant for each application will be based on the extent of repair work needed for that property, and again, not to exceed $10,000. Staff will provide an informational report to the commission detailing the number of grants that were awarded, addresses of properties that received the grants, and scope of repair work when available later this year. So staff recommends that the commission adopt the resolution regarding the 2020 Adopt a Landmark funding priority and Together Now fund applications. A copy of this resolution and the attached Exhibit A was provided to you as part of your packet of information, and it is on this slide as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I'm sure that commissioners have some questions, but I do have a couple of questions. In your presentation, you indicated that businesses will have the opportunity to apply to two sources of funds. Does the Adopt a Landmark funding replaces one of those two sources, or will they be able to apply for those two other sources or just one more?
It would be just one more. It will be two sources in total, one for a physical repair and one for an operational grant.
So they could apply for the Adopt a Landmark plus one other source of funds.
Correct.
Okay. Do you have a sense of how many buildings were damaged? Buildings that are within the landmarks districts?
We do not have a total number of buildings that were damaged. As I mentioned in that map, that was based on the actual reports of damage to the city. There may be others that were damaged that were not reported at that point, and that was dated June 2nd. We certainly know that there were buildings that were damaged in a number of our districts, including some individual landmarks.
And how will this be advertised to the general public?
So the mayor's office created a website for this application. The application actually was posted on the 20th and it closed on the 29th. So the applications are now being reviewed, and once they are, they've completed their initial review, the ones that do apply to landmark properties will be sent to us for review.
Another question. So when somebody submits an application, what we're doing here is granting you the authority to fund the transaction without coming in front of the commission?
So per code, for projects that have not been completed, the commission needs to review the scope of work and budget. So what we are presenting to you is, instead of doing it one by one per application, we are presenting this list of scopes of repair that then would be tailored for each project depending on their physical damage. So what we're asking is you to approve this for this limited instance for staff to be able to then quickly review the applications, that they do not have to wait to come to monthly meetings.
Right. So that's what I was getting at.
Correct.
Because this is an emergency that will be able to apply, and the staff, provided that they meet the requirements, that the department will be able to fund that transaction.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I had a few comments. Number one was the fact that the applications have already closed, and this is just now coming before us to make a decision on. I think in the future, we should be more proactive about this instead of reactionary, because there's a lot of local businesses that I think we as commissioners could get out there, boots on the ground, to advertise these efforts to, if they don't have access, for instance, to the mayor reports that are going out. Number two, I think that, Deanna, please correct me, these approvals for the storefront, the window work, the masonry, that's going to allow staff to quickly make decisions, and then anything outside of that will be kicked to the commission for us to review on a one-on-one basis. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay,
It will
so
be
we're
per
not.
standard review process.
Okay, great. And I guess the last comment I had was, I'm really excited that our commission is taking the funds. I know we haven't voted yet, but that we are stepping up to respond to a state of emergency and helping these local businesses, because I was reading, they do absolutely contribute to the vitality of our city and our neighborhoods. So I'm very proud of us for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Wong?
I had a question regarding approval of whatever that request is. So does that mean the store owner or the building owner has to produce bids, I guess, by contractors, or some sort of proposals by all of the contractors that they are looking to engage with in order to get this? And then afterwards, will they be audited? I guess similar to the Cook County tax incentives that we give to potential folks that are doing improvements to their buildings.
The applications would include, and the requirement is to supply information regarding the building permit application that has been submitted. And along with that application, there would be an estimate of costs and the scope of work. So part of the application does require that, again, it's all going to be based on the extent of the work, but there would be some contract with the contractor to do the work that would set out what their costs will be. So we have a better sense of how much the grant should be for that particular project. If the project has been completed already and they're requesting a reimbursement, they would have some invoice that they can provide. We are asking for photographs in order to comply with the requirement that we make sure that the work meets the commission standards. The building permit is really the way to review that, and the work that would be done actually does require a permit for landmark buildings. So it's not an extra ask to provide this information. And then regarding the completion, we do ask that the applicant reach out to us once the project is completed with information, photographs, and we would be able to provide then an overview and verification that the work has been completed and report back to you.
Thank you. Commissioner Aguirre.
Thank you. Would it be possible to go to the slide with the map that you presented, Diana? Thank you. This is super helpful. I really appreciate having a visual. I think there's a lot of information that is being gathered, collected right now, and just being able to visualize where the support is needed, and also to understand how this requests are aligned with a multiple amount of efforts that the city is putting in place and trying to align. I think these are the tools that I think they're very helpful for all of us to understand how these resources are going to be directed. So thank you for sharing this as part of this presentation. I would also, if possible, add to the layer of Invest Southwest, because that's a very strong boundary initiative policy at this moment. So for the public also to have access to these visuals and understand the alignment of all these efforts that are simultaneously developing, in addition to the ones that are coming really fast, allocating resources to our communities. I think my question to the staff and also as a reflection is, how do you anticipate monitoring and tracking where all these resources are being allocated? I really appreciated the report from the last grants allocated, and I wonder, how are you envisioning reporting back, especially because resources are going to start moving relatively fast. I'm speaking the next quarter, the next 6 months, the next year, so we can evaluate how these resources are helping the communities that need it the most.
So the department is preparing every year a year-end report that tracks all the projects, not just the Adopt a Landmark, but all of the NOF projects as well. So there is a report that is part of this whole program. As far as the specific of the Together Now Fund, we certainly anticipate that because these applications are already submitted, that the goal is to get through reviewing and providing grants very quickly, that within a short period of time, we should be able to provide a comprehensive report on all the grants that were awarded through the Adopt a Landmark Fund to you. We will also at that point know how what funds remain in this 2020 authorized City Council authorized Adopt a Landmark grant fund spending, and what then the next steps would be. As part of the presentation, the program has been designed to be a citywide application round, so that once it's posted and published and advertised, everyone that qualifies can apply for those funds. And we typically keep the application on our website as well for at least a month to give people the ability to provide a comprehensive application and put their information together.
Thank you, Deanna. Commissioner Tolliver.
Yes, I'm supportive of this effort. I think it's very important, but I want to raise a few cautionary issues. I know these are small grants, so you only have so many human resources in terms of staff time available to evaluate and administer. So that's going to be a problem. It's very important that you get estimates from contractors when the application is submitted. You said that, and the reason I mentioned this piece is because I formerly served on the Neighborhood Opportunity Grants Fund, and we had a focus group at some point. And invariably, the small business people said one of the hurdles was they couldn't find contractors. So they hadn't done the upfront work before they got the grant. And then they found out they couldn't find anybody to do the work. So that's a very important piece. Another is that, those of us in the real estate development field, we value engineer a job. So someone tells us it's going to cost X dollars. We go through the line items and say, oh, you can do better than this if you do this quality work. We know how most of the time, not all the time, to spot where prices are inflated in line items for proposed construction work. So, your ability to analyze and know for sure that these contractor bids, I just raise that as a red flag. It's something for you to think about. And another side of that is, this is an anecdotal but true story. I saw a barber whose shop I know interviewed on television, and they had been vandalized. And he said, we had $50,000 worth of damage. Well, I happen to know a barber who works at that shop. And I said, and I know the shop. I said, how did he come up with $50,000 worth of estimated damages? He said, man, you know how it is. We probably got about $3,000 or $4,000 worth of stuff in the building. So I just put out all of these cautionary issues, and I don't know how you manage them given the volume you're going to get, but it's very important to look at all those things.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Tolliver. Let me ask Deanna, do you have in place a process to vet all the transactions?
So there's been a serious conversation and decisions made about how these applications will be reviewed, and there also have been put in place various service organizations that will participate in that review. So it's not just going to be staff. And obviously we are only focusing on the Adopt a Landmark grants, and considering even looking at this map where you see the landmark districts, I think our applications would likely be very limited because just of the extent of, our geographic area, but certainly other grant programs will have a different process, and they have consultants also that are going to help through that review.
Thank you. Commissioner Cox.
Thank you, Deanna, for the presentation and framing this, and particularly this map. And I'd just like to stand back for a moment. The need for this fund emerged from the mayor's visits to corridors that had been damaged I think we've all passed through corridors where we saw plate glass windows shattered and the board ups. I similarly toured the west and south side, and it's pretty devastating to sit in a shop owner's space that has been looted and to say, well, you know, our funds are for this or for that, and they aren't able to respond. And I think the mayor challenged the planning department and other departments to take those same funds that are meant for long-term investments and allow them to be marshaled for kind of a rapid fire response. And this conversation was 2 weeks ago, 14 days ago. And this fund was launched in an effort to try to respond to things happening on the ground. And I don't think I've ever seen local government be this quick to respond. So much so that things, as was mentioned by some of the commissioners, are almost out of sequence because this is government attempting to be nimble, responsive, and I think that's what is happening. This map is also revealing because the Adopt a Landmark funds will only be used in historic districts. So we had to find a way to capture all of those dots that are not in historic districts. So TIF dollars are being brought to bear. Other neighborhood opportunity dollars are being marshaled to create this fund to address all of the different things, all the kinds of damages we're seeing wherever they happen. We haven't actually talked about what a $10,000 grant represents and how many. So if $1 million, if it turns out that $1 million in $10,000 grants are issued from the Adopt a Landmark, that's 100 grants. I think we're not even sure when you do a scan of the folks who have applied, whether there will be 100 grants. So I think that's it's very important. Obviously, there's a question underlying all of this that is a question that's very, very relevant today because of the lack of historic districts on the south side and on the west side. So those buildings that are noteworthy, although they may not have a critical mass and be established as a historic district, won't be accessing these funds. And so you think about areas like 18th Street in Pilsen. They won't be able to access Adopt a Landmark funds, even though there was damage done on that historic street. So I hope that in some way that the issue of making sure that areas in the south side and the west side, which are genuinely historic, that we double down our effort to educate those merchants and property owners of the value of being in a historic district. But again, this is, I think, example of government responding the way government traditionally is unable to respond, and that is within 14 days, putting up a fund that allows business owners to access the funds they need. And I think most of you will be interesting to do a post audit of this, because I think most of it is going to be replacing damaged storefronts, glass, plate glass, doors that were damaged. It may not be extensive work, but the idea that someone has $50,000 of damage in their property, I think I will be very interested to see how that plays out, and understanding there's a cap on this at 10,000. But that's the maximum that they can get. Some people are going to be coming in with, $2,000 ask and, $5,000 ask. So I think the monitoring of how effective this program is going to be helpful. And then we may, it may suggest some type of smaller grant program in the future that we stand up or that we continue, because a lot of these buildings don't work. You know, the Adopt a Landmark has tended in its debut, tended towards the multi-$100,000 ask. Well, this is trying to say, you know, is there a place for a smaller kind of grant program? So I think there's a lot that we'll learn from this. And I hope the commission will ask for those reports once this is done to see what we can learn about how the Adopt a Landmark fund, how the flexibility that it should have internally to it.
Thank you. Before I call on the other commissioners who raised their hands, let me ask these questions to you, Commissioner Cox, Deanna. And this is based on the comment from that you just made, as well as the comment from Commissioner Tolliver. Let's assume for a minute that there is a legitimate transaction that costs $50,000. The maximum that they could get from under this resolution is $10,000 under the Adopt a Landmark. They could apply for another $10,000 under a different program. Could they come back to the commission and apply for an additional $30,000, in which case the transaction will have to come into the full commission for approval?
Deanna, do you want to address that?
There is nothing here that would prevent them to apply as part of any regular application program.
So they could come back and say we need more than the
apply
10,000.
when we have an application round. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I want to just commend the staff and everyone in the Department of Planning for the impressive response. It takes a lot of time to put a program like this together, and it makes me really proud to be a part of the commission and to be proud to be a citizen in Chicago that folks are mobilizing this quickly to get funds out the door. So thank you very much. I also really appreciate your comment, Commissioner Cox, about doubling down on outreach to communities that aren't well represented in the historic districts. I think that these applications will be really telling about who is connected to opportunities and who isn't, and it could help us figure out where we need to put more efforts into outreach. Along those lines, I have two questions for the staff. The first one, I'll say both questions so then you can answer both at the same time. Is the intention to disperse all of the funding in one round? The reason why I ask is because I'm curious if there will be an opportunity for groups who either weren't aware of this opportunity at present between the time that the applications were open and closed and they hear about it subsequently, if there will be a second round for those folks. So not people who have already applied, but for folks who missed the opportunity or simply didn't have the capacity because of all the challenges that they were facing to put together an application with everything else that they were dealing with. And secondly, I'm wondering if whether it's one or multiple rounds, if there is an opportunity to prioritize requests that are in the Invest Southwest communities. Thank you.
Deanna?
For, I guess, the second question first, I think that we are not, depending on obviously the number of applications, the overall program has been designed as a lottery system if there are overwhelming number of applications for these grants. But for the Adopt a Landmark specifically, I truly feel that we would be able to provide grants to the applications that we receive based on what we have allocated for this year. I cannot answer about the second round. I think that is, I mean, certainly I understand how we can manage the Adopt a Landmark, but for the wider program, I think that is something we would need to consult and be able to respond later.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. Guys, I think this is a real opportunity for us to be solution providers. I think we are identifying a lot of problems, but I want us to put solutions forward as well. Earlier, I think that there was a mention of, if these people don't have access to contractors to have the correct numbers for bidding. Deanna, do we have like a contractor list for these different neighborhoods that people can reference somewhere listed on a website or a portal for contractors to enter their information into as a reference so that these businesses can have access to the resources that they may not know where to search for and get them? And then my second point was, I guess, about this fund not being available for a lot of the South and West sides because they are not deemed historic. Why did we create the rule for these funds to only be the emergency funds, not the Adopt a Landmark, but the emergency funds to only be available for historically deemed properties? Is there a way for us to deem properties that are of a certain age to be available as applicants for this fund? I think that I understand that the original Adopt a Landmark funds are for properties deemed historic, but I'm not understanding why, if we have historic properties, older properties in the South and West sides that are not deemed historic, why are we casting them out of this emergency fund?
So if I can offer clarification, just because the fund has a target of making $15 million available to businesses in these geographies that are outlined on the map. The Adopt a Landmark is contributing those resources that we have, but there won't be any qualification that you have to be an historic district to receive funds from this Together Now fund if you're on one of the corridors that received extensive damage. So we're talking about the narrow funds which are regulated for better or for worse by ordinance, by council, that sets specific restrictions on the Adopt a Landmark. So what we're really talking about is the subset of grants that are going to be available because you are in a historic district for the Adopt a Landmark funds. But if let's say that's $1 million, the other 14 million will have no such restrictions. It can go to a small business that is in a anonymous mercantile building on a commercial corridor. There are no guidelines at all that you have to be historic to access these funds. Only the funds for Adopt a Landmark. If I'm stating that correctly, Deanna, you might elaborate.
No, that is correct, Commissioner. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And are the percentages broken out for what those funds are from all of these different resources?
That there have been funds that were asked to come from the TIF allocation.
Yeah, I saw the different pots. I just didn't know like what percentages of allocations came from each of those pots.
Yeah. Well, I think the planning department was asked to find $10 million. And so we looked at all of the different financial pots we have to come up with 10 million. But again, it's going to be based on need. We don't know if we're going to exceed that need and that 10 to 15 million is the money that the mayor's office has committed to raise philanthropically to create this fund.
Yeah, I thank you for the clarification, Commissioner Cox. I still want to, I guess, maybe I'm not saying my point correctly, but in the future for Adopt a Landmark funds, should we cast a wider net and allow for properties that are of a certain age, for instance, to be able to apply. And I guess simultaneously to receive a landmark status while they are applying.
Commissioner Hughes, I think that I could clarify a little bit of this. It's very specific in the ordinance how a building could be funded under the Adopt a Landmark, and Michael may want to clarify this, but it's not just because a building is of certain age, unless it's in if it's not in a historic district or it's not a landmark, most likely it will not qualify. It has to be one or the other. But I will ask either Diana or Michael to clarify that this program is guided by the principles of or the guidelines of the ordinance itself.
That's correct, Commissioner or Chairman. The Adopt a Landmark fund is created by the zoning ordinance as one of the three density bonuses: Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, Local Impact Fund, and Adopt a Landmark Fund. And so the zoning ordinance restricts the use of Adopt a Landmark funds to be spent on either landmark buildings or contributing buildings within a designated landmark district. So that's why this this sliver, this Adopt a Landmark sliver of the much larger recovery fund is only going to be spent on the on those two types of buildings. If Adopt a Landmark were to be expanded, that'd have to be an amendment to the zoning ordinance undertaken by the City Council, whether just for this specific purpose of recovering from the unrest, or for a larger use of Adopt a Landmark funds going forward.
Thank you. And let me also clarify for Commissioner Hughes the issue about getting references from the Department of Planning or the Landmarks Commission or the staff regarding general contractors. I don't think that it will be appropriate for the staff to refer to any specific contractor, but what they can do is refer the applicant to the list of minority companies, as well as delegate agencies or community organizations that could help them identify general contractors. You want to avoid any potential misinterpretation that the department or the Landmarks Commission is giving work to or giving references for a specific GC. That's not the case. So I will avoid doing that. And I know that the staff doesn't do that. If somebody has a question about a reference for somebody who can do specific work, I'm sure that they could refer them to a community organization or to a public list like the Minority and Women Enterprise book that the city keeps in terms of getting deciding who to hire to do the work. So that's just to clarify your question, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Burke. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, picking up on Commissioner Hughes's comment about offering solutions, it seems to me that this might not be an option for funding immediately, but my question to the legal department and the staff in historic preservation is there a possibility that in the future we could extend eligibility for something like this to projects, to sites and districts that are under consideration? So for example, when Commissioner Cox talked about 18th Street and all of the damage, at our last meeting, there was some discussion about folks in the proposed landmark district in Pilsen not understanding what the opportunities were and the financial incentives. And if an opportunity like this was available simply for being proposed and because we were entertaining a possibility, that in and of itself could be tremendous outreach within the community and word of mouth from business to business. And for a district to see that actual change, it could help get folks invested in the long-term opportunities of what we're trying to accomplish across the city, particularly in the underrepresented community.
That's a very good point, Commissioner. However, I would caution everybody that in order to do that, the commission will have to vote in a specific process that then will have to be referred to City Council to amend the ordinance that allows for funding of those transactions. So it's no, as much as we like to help as many people and as many businesses as possible, I think that we have to be, we need to understand that we have to go through the legal process of doing that. And it will require amending the ordinance. Commissioner Cox.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate the thought, and that you know, it really did not. This is all happening. As I said, this fund was established literally 14 days ago. The idea that it would be needed. So you're seeing things, the government really try and respond to a need. And I'm appreciative that, you know, and surprised, quite frankly, that the government could establish a fund this quickly. But this question about districts that are under consideration being afforded the same privilege as someone, a district that's already been established, I think that is that's a very lucid point you make. And I think we all know that when a district is under consideration, often it's, you know, certainly for demo, it is treated like the district already exists. So that thought is a very strong one. I would agree with the chair that the cumbersome process of getting something before council, the change in ordinance, is the part that would have undermined that recommendation. I will say, and I don't want to take us off topic, but it may be worth having Deanna give us an update on Pilsen. Because that proposed district is not out of it's not out of the woods yet, relative to the possibility that there will be more historic districts in the west side and the south side. But the conversation that we've had, and this question about how do you capture buildings that are clearly historic, but they haven't been designated as such, that Commissioner Hughes brought up, it's worth our further deliberation, because those same historic buildings are the first buildings that are going to be held up and renovated in the Invest Southwest corridor, but they don't have the benefit of either being rated an orange rated building, or they certainly are not in historic districts. So it's a topic that I think this commission should come back to.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Cox. If I could suggest, since we have a meeting of the commission next week, that update regarding the Pilsen takes place next week, because we publish an agenda. So I think that even usually we request other businesses. So rather than doing that today, I will ask Deanna or the staff to submit an update next week, if you don't mind.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Okay, last comment. I do.
You can make as many comments as you wish.
Thank you for clarifying again. And I think the reasoning behind my comments, I'm still learning obviously about the processes, is that I challenge our commission and us to figure out ways to creatively draw more funds into these neighborhoods that are depleted in the south and west sides. I'm just putting that on the record and saying it out loud. My suggestions may not be valid, or there's layers of constraints that are restricting whatever I'm saying, but I think that we creatively need to figure out how to pour more resources into these neighborhoods. And then I also want to clarify to Deanna's response earlier, and actually to Commissioner Leon's response, Chairman, when I said create a resource deck or pool or portal for contractors, I was not saying that we would tell them which contractor to choose, or we would specify, who to pick, but just to allow a portal for contractors to volunteer themselves as a resource, I think would blur the lines. And I don't think that would come across as us suggesting a particular contractor, but for them to have a list of contractors that are available and have no restriction on who volunteers themselves to submit themselves as a resource.
Point well taken. And let me clarify that your suggestions are great. We just need to take them one step further to see how do we get to implement a suggestion. And because this is a public process and we're subject to the regulations of City Council, we should abide by those. But I don't want you to feel like we're dismissing your ideas. I think that your ideas are very good and worth exploring in the near future. Commissioner Tolliver.
Yes, I'm sympathetic to what Commissioner Hughes is saying, but like you, I've worked on the ground for 30 years in this, and we know that contractors have various competencies and lack thereof. And I support your statement, your response earlier, because that leaves us open to legal liabilities, knowing that fact. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Commissioner Aguirre.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to also add an additional comment related to Commissioner Hughes. I think we do have some of those resources in the city, and it will be just a matter of revising, like there are directories, right? There are directories that are for many categories. Our professional groups, AIA, ASLA, planning, APA, have this as resources. I think it's more about connecting communities to those resources. The reason I mentioned this is because, a lot of the business owners with the real need to access some of the resources, they don't have the capacity to, look into this pool of inventory that is out there. Sometimes our duty as, civic resources, city resources is like, how can we pull this all together so it's not, it takes some of the capacity of the small businesses and doing that part of the work, and we can support them in finding the resources as fast as possible. In this case, we're talking about resources of construction professionals, design professionals that can be of assistance, immediate assistance in the different areas. And I think that's where the city could take leadership, the Department of Planning could take leadership. And I know some of those resources are in place, but like revisiting how those resources to access the professionals that can assist these businesses with these resources could be made, could be much more connected.
Thank you. I just want to be very cautious about that. I know that the resources out there, I think, as Commissioner Tolliver mentioned, there is a legal aspect that if I didn't think about it, but there is a legal aspect that you don't want anybody to say, DPD or Landmarks Commission refer me to this resource, and I hired this person that it turned out to be a really bad resource. So that aside, I think that we need to take a look at the bigger picture on dealing with that. And maybe the staff will be able to address that at some point. Commissioner Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I can lend a little bit of advice and input to what Commissioner Hughes has been trying to address. As an MBE business, the city's resources under their procurement does have a list of MBE, WBE, and veteran-owned businesses that are available. That list, however, is typically so that they can go after city contracts. So a lot of times, that involves some union issues as well. I think a better resource to answer your question would actually be neighborhood chambers of commerce. Those folks on the ground really have a lot of lists, and those areas that don't have a chamber of commerce may start to develop some sort of business organization that can serve as a chamber of commerce, and they can reach out to other chambers of commerce throughout the south and west sides that can assist them in assembling that. I think a lot of contractors who don't have city applications would be a lot more would be a lot more receptive to actually going to their local chamber of commerce than to going to the city and getting themselves on the city list. And that's just what I found in the different neighborhoods that I've been in.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just don't want to digress. I think that all of these are very good points, and I don't want to digress too much from what it is, the resolution that we're considering right now. So if I could ask the staff to look into how to approach this issue, that would be appropriate. But I want to go back to the issue at hand about the Adopt a Landmark resolution and proposal that we're considering. Commissioner Cox.
So if you would like, I would be happy to offer a motion regarding the item at hand, unless there's more discussion and questions.
Well, I was going to call for a motion. So, but let me ask, commissioners, do you have any specific other questions about the Adopt a Landmark resolution that we're considering at this point? If there are none, I would like to request a motion to accept the 2020 funding priority and together now fund applications proposed for Citywide Adopt a Landmark. And I'm assuming that you, Commissioner Cox, are moving on that.
I see a hand by Hughes. I wonder if she's the one who wants to offer the motion.
I'm seconding.
Oh, you're seconding.
Okay, so I offer the motion to move the motion.
All right, and seconded by Commissioner Hughes. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? And I vote aye as well, so the motion carries unanimously. So let's
Mr. Chairman?
show. Yeah.
Chairman, I do think for purposes of the new Open Meetings Act amendment, you should take a roll call vote. Sorry.
Okay. let me do that. Commissioner Cox move. Commissioner, let me call Commissioner Cox.
Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yes.
Commissioner Osmond.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes.
Commissioner Wong.
Aye.
Commissioner Tolliver.
Yes.
And Commissioner Yekovich.
Yes.
And I'm Rafael Leon, and I affirm the votes. I don't think that I missed anybody. So it's a unanimous vote. Thank you. We don't have any other business today.
I do have one thing, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
And being that we've done this, and thanks to the commissioners for your support of this. As I said, it's unusual for government to move this fast. So I just wanted to applaud the staff for putting this recommendation and for the commissioners for advancing it. I don't know how we return to the item that Commissioner Hughes brought up, but I did think I thought it was worth noting because the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund has recently announced the 32 finalists.
That's new, the Van Buren signage.
And they announced it this week. I would encourage you to see the video that was put on it. These are businesses in the South Side and the West Side, 32, almost all of the buildings that they want to work on are existing buildings. So this will be a case study in adaptive reuse and rehab. Not all the buildings were deemed historic, with a capital A, but they are all existing buildings. And what the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund has done to make sure that some of these first-time entrepreneurs have a process that is successful and gets them to the finish line, we have put out a call for qualifications for designers who would like to work with these small businesses to help them to rehab and adapt and do these interiors. So that is, that call for qualifications is out. In addition, we are hiring a contractor, a general contractor coach for all of these folks so that they will understand how to procure design services, but also how to get out bids, multiple bids, so that they can learn to work with contractors. We're going to surround them with an estimator, as well as a financial coach. And all of these, so the same thing you were suggesting that we would need in historic districts, we are piloting that team for the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund finalists to see if we can't get them to the finish line with a lot more grace and a higher rate of success. And then I would just say that I know Deanna and others have been working really hard to see how we could adapt the landmark fund to meet kind of the mercantile needs of a corridor like 18th Street. So if it were to become a historic district, the whole notion of the size of the grants and how the grants would be administered would change. And if we are trying to not talk about the single merchant, but the collection of merchants on a block, which would constitute really an amazing resource. But we have not gotten to the point where those merchants or stakeholders feel empowered yet by the historic landmark district as a vehicle. So again, I think the chair has asked for some type of update on that. And I would love to have this kind of discussion we've had today around how do we support Pilsen in the future.
Thank you, Commissioner. Actually, I was going to request two updates. An update on this issue for next week meeting, but also in December to get an update from the staff of how many applicants we have received under this Adopt a Landmark application and identifying the transactions. So if we can get that in December, that will give us 6 months to see how this program has worked. But for next week, if we can get an update on the other issue, that would be good.
Great.
Thank you. I think that's it for today. So we don't have any other business. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Burns, you raised your hand.
Sorry, just thinking about the staff who put together this program in 14 days, and now we have a meeting next week, and you guys maybe just need a little breathing room. Can we be flexible about how much they can put together in a week based on everything that they've done so far?
Point well taken. So let's move it then to August or September. Usually when we request an update, the staff has the flexibility of saying, we're looking into it. We haven't had any time to look at this. So they do have a flexibility. It's not a hard deadline to present that. So I think that this is just because it's fresh in our memories right now, but we can postpone it until September. And then in December, get the update about the actual applications and the funding of transactions. Okay, so this is going to be more of an update. And thank you to the staff for doing this. I think that you guys have done an excellent job. And thank you, commissioners, for participating in this emergency meeting. I think that it's very important that we all join forces in dealing with what we're facing right now, the looting, the demonstrations, everything that has taken place, the pandemic, which seems to be here for quite some time, unfortunately. So I wish everybody the best and be safe. So with that in mind, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I have a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 We're adjourned and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.